Ralph Waldo Emerson was not merely a philosopher or essayist. He was a spiritual beacon whose ideas sent ripples through generations of writers, poets, and seekers. His core message of self-reliance, inner divinity, and direct experience with truth reverberated far beyond his own lectures and essays. Before publishing Leaves of Grass, Whitman read Emerson's The Poet, which called for a new kind of American bard, one who could express the soul of the common man in a bold, uninhibited voice. Whitman took up that call with gusto. His verse was expansive, sensual, and unapologetically self. When Emerson read the first edition of Leaves of Grass, he immediately recognized its brilliance and wrote to Whitman, "I greet you at the beginning of a great career." His public endorsement helped launch Whitman's reputation, but more importantly, it confirmed that Emerson saw in Whitman the realization of his poetic prophecy. Whitman, in turn, reflected many of Emerson's central themes, particularly the divinity of the self and the holiness of the everyday. In poems like Song of Myself, Whitman speaks of the body and soul as sacred, of the interconnectedness of all people, and of a spirit that runs through every blade of grass. These were ideas Emerson championed, but Whitman gave them flesh and rhythm. Where Emerson wrote essays, Whitman wrote incantations. Both men believed that the sacred was not hidden in some far-off heaven but present in the here and now, in the breath, in the dirt, in the self. It's the central voice of the Transcendentalist movement in 19th century America. Emerson challenged the dominant religious and cultural norms of his time. Their ideas, deeply rooted in American soil, took on a universal resonance. Emerson's call for self-reliance and spiritual independence continues to inspire seekers worldwide. Thoreau's commitment to civil disobedience remains a potent force for social change. And Whitman's celebration of the self and the body paved the way for countless artists and free spirits. Together, they form a constellation that continues to illuminate the path for those who seek a deeper, more authentic way of being in the world. He emphasized the sanctity of the individual soul and the spiritual power of nature. Breaking away from the rigid doctrines and societal constraints of his Puritan heritage, but perhaps even more enduring than his own body of work, was the way his vision inspired others, among them Henry David Thoreau, Walt Whitman, and a lineage of modern spiritual writers who continue to echo his ideals today. Henry David Thoreau, perhaps Emerson's most direct intellectual heir, was deeply shaped by his mentor's philosophy. While Emerson offered the framework for a new way of seeing the world, Thoreau put that vision into action. The two men first met in Concord, Massachusetts, where Emerson quickly recognized Thoreau's potential and encouraged his literary development. Emerson opened his personal library to Thoreau, introduced him to Boston's intellectual circles, and provided him space on his land near Walden Pond, where Thoreau would undertake his famous 2-year experiment in simple living. But it was more than just mentorship. It was a philosophical lineage. Thoreau absorbed Emerson's belief that truth could be found not through institutions or inherited doctrines, but through quiet reflection, solitude, and communion with nature. In Walden, Thoreau wrote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not live of the products of the earth uncontaminate and self-supporting." This line echoes Emerson's transcendental convictions and his call to suck the marrow out of life. For both thinkers, the path to wisdom lay in a life well lived and direct engagement with the world. Thoreau took this idea further, transforming Emerson's philosophy into a way of life. Yet Thoreau was not a mere imitator. He expanded Emerson's ideas into new territories, particularly in the realm of social justice and civil disobedience. Where Emerson often stopped at the philosophical, Thoreau took action. His essay Civil Disobedience, which advocated for resisting unjust laws, influenced global leaders like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. still. The seed was Emerson's, the belief that the moral authority of the individual can and must stand above institutional power. Thoreau's political activism, rooted in transcendental individualism, shows how Emerson's thought wasn't only contemplative, but revolutionary. Another profound figure shaped by Emerson was Walt Whitman, the poet who gave voice to America's spiritual democracy. The influence of Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman didn't end with their own lifetimes. What if I told you there's a secret lineage of spiritual wisdom that connects the 19th century? American thinker Ralph Waldo Emerson to modern gurus like Eckhart Tolle, You might think these two figures are worlds apart, but I'm here to show you the surprising ways. Emerson's ideas have echoed through time. This was a bold step, even beyond Emerson, who sometimes maintained a more reserved and philosophical tone. Yet the root of this boldness was Emersonian in nature. The rejection of shame, the embrace of personal authenticity, and the refusal to be bound by religious orthodoxy. Thinkers like Brown, who speak about vulnerability, authenticity, and courage, follow Emerson's lead in urging people to trust themselves and live wholeheartedly. He never founded a church, nor did he try to establish a school of followers in the formal sense. His assertion that the soul knows no persons meant that the inner light was not the privilege of saints or scholars, but the birthright of all. This notion resonated deeply in American culture, aligning with the ideals of equality and self-determination. Thoreau became a prophet of simplicity. Whitman became a poet of democratic ecstasy. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on our latest videos. Modern spiritual leaders became guides of inner transformation. All of them were, in some way, lit by Emerson's flame. His legacy is not a set of rules, but a way of being, open, searching, grounded in self-trust and reverence for life. It provided a moral and spiritual grounding for movements that came later. Abolition, civil rights, environmentalism, each finding in Emerson a voice that called people back to conscience, nature, and truth. Instead, he gave people permission to think for themselves, to challenge convention, and to believe that truth could be discovered in the quiet chambers of one's own mind and heart. This open-ended spiritual framework made Emerson accessible across generations and cultural divides. Whether one is rooted in Christianity, Buddhism, mysticism, or no tradition at all, Emerson's ideas invite exploration without fear of heresy. The phrase, "trust thyself," lifted directly from Emerson's essay Self-Reliance, could serve as the tagline for countless modern movements promoting inner wisdom and self-empowerment. In Whitman's expansive lines and his joyful embrace of life's paradoxes, Emerson's transcendental seeds blossomed into a new kind of sacred poetry. Whitman took the idea of the divine self and sang it to the world, influencing spiritual thought and shaping the very language we use to talk about inner growth and enlightenment. Countless American classrooms have introduced students to self-reliance, not just as a literary text, but as a formative document in the shaping of American identity. The idea that each individual should cultivate their unique genius, rather than conform to external standards, has inspired generations of writers, artists, and thinkers. The beat poets of the 1950s, the counterculture of the 1960s, and today's mindfulness movement all share spiritual DNA with Emerson's transcendental vision. Even in the digital age, where attention is fractured and many seek meaning in fleeting forms, Emerson's voice cuts through with clarity. His invitation to slow down, observe nature, reflect deeply, and trust one's inner guide is more relevant than ever. As the noise of modern life grows louder, his call to silence the soul environs itself with friends that it may enter into a grander self-possession, becomes a needed refuge. What set Whitman apart from many of his literary peers was his willingness to celebrate the human body and physical experience as a form of spiritual revelation. Emerson's influence didn't stop with his contemporaries. Spiritual philosophy would ripple into the 20th and 21st centuries, quietly shaping the vocabulary of modern spirituality. Writers and thinkers far removed from Concord would find in Emerson a source of timeless wisdom. One of the most direct spiritual successors to Emerson in the modern era is Eckhart Tolle, though separated by time and cultural context. Both Emerson and Tolle speak to the same inner truth, the power of present awareness, the illusory nature of ego, and the sacredness of inner stillness. Tolle's best-selling book, The Power of Now, explores spiritual awakening through the lens of mindfulness. Yet many of its core principles can be traced back to Emerson's belief that we must turn inward to find truth, that the soul is not a passive vessel, but an active expression of divinity. Similarly, Deepak Chopra, who blends Eastern philosophy with Western science and spiritual psychology, echoes Emerson's assertion that our true nature is divine and boundless. Chopra's emphasis on the interconnectedness of mind, body, and spirit, and his belief in a universal consciousness mirrors Emerson's view of the oversoul, a spiritual essence shared by all living things. where Emerson wrote, "We live in succession, in division, in parts, in particles. Meantime, within man is the soul of the whole, the eternal one." Chopra speaks of pure consciousness as the unifying field of all experience. Marianne Williamson, another modern spiritual teacher, also draws from Emerson's well. Her work, rooted in A Course in Miracles, frequently returns to themes of inner power, divine love, and self-healing concepts that Emerson explored in his essays on the spiritual laws that govern our lives. Williamson's message, often directed at a modern audience seeking meaning outside traditional religion, feels distinctly Emersonian in its insistence that each person carries within them the spark of the infinite. Even beyond explicitly spiritual writers, Emerson's influence shows up in popular psychology, leadership theory, and self-help literature. What makes Emerson's influence so enduring is his refusal to offer fixed doctrines or rigid systems. Moreover, Emerson helped to democratize spirituality. At a time when religious authority was often centralized in pulpits and scriptures, he declared that every person was a window to the divine. In education and literature, too, Emerson's influence has been quietly transformative. Ultimately, the mark of Emerson's greatness is not just what he wrote, but how he helped others become more fully themselves. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends.